Hey, it's Sergeant Stavros here from How Good Is This, the Thug Mills podcast. You know and love Thug Mills from our short film, Thuggies Do China, so why don't you check out the pod? Now, I won't try and convince you by pretending to be the Green Day manager. I've actually done something useful and prepared a compilation of our best skits. But I won't disrespect the 30-second time limit either, so I have to play them all at once.
Chat to the job.
No time for me.
You're an artist.
Right now, so here you go. And now they go. Thug Mills.
Hey, welcome to the Anti-Social Podcast, and before we kick into this week's episode, you know what I'm going to say. Come and join me on Patreon, patreon.com/Andy Dowling. Support starts from $1 a month, dirt cheap, set and forget, nice little feel-good payment, and there are additional tiers if you want to support a little bit more and get access to exclusive content, such as a weekly podcast episode. Patreon.com/Andy Dowling. Hello friends, episode 238 of the Anti-Social Podcast is here, and this week's guest is Derek Rucker. Now, if you're not familiar with Derek is, in my opinion, one of the basketball greats who played in the Australian National Basketball League, the NBL, and Derek came out in the late 80s and carved out this 15-season career playing for teams such as the Brisbane Bullets, the Newcastle Falcons, the Townsville Suns, West Sydney Razorbacks, and just built up an amazing career of accolades. And for me, growing up in the 90s, I got to see Derek play quite a bit. Really enjoyed watching him and kind of idolized him along with a whole bunch of other amazing players in the NBL during that time in the 90s. So for me to chat to Derek on this podcast was pretty cool. Like it was pretty surreal. So go and check out Derek Rucker on the socials, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Derek's got his own podcast called the Derek Rucker Podcast. That's on Instagram and YouTube. He's also got his coaching program called Derek Rucker Basketball, which is on all the socials as well. I will have everything in the show notes over at andysocial.net and andydowling.net. You should also be able to click through on your podcast player. There'll be a bunch of clickable links there as well. But enough crapping on from me. Please enjoy this amazing chat with Derek Rucker.
Yeah, I love music. Music's a big hobby of mine.
That's cool. That's awesome. Yeah, it's one of those things that I think it can be an absolute lifesaver for people. I think sport's obviously a big thing for people. It's an outlet and a way to escape. And music does the same thing. It's just it's to find some purpose and
well, that's so crazy because I don't know if you follow. I don't know how long you follow my Twitter feed for, but I one of my favorite groups, oddly enough, is Happy Mondays.
Yeah, cool.
And and at different dark stages in my life, they were my savior. Yeah. They were like, and as it turns out, through Twitter and everything, I've become friends with them. And now, I have a relationship with the drummer and the backup singer. And like when they were out here, we all hung out together like last year or the year before last when they toured. And it's just, it's so interesting. And then when they hear, the stories and they're like, wow, that's just amazing. And it really, you just never know how you're going to impact on someone else at a critical juncture for that person, no matter what type of utility you provide, Oh,
for sure. And did you? I know a lot of people have a real reluctance to meet people that have been a big influence or had a big impact in their life, just because they're worried that maybe whatever's been created in their mind of the mystique around, whether it be music or in sport or whatever it might be, that when you meet them in reality and you get to be in front of them, that maybe the mystique disappears. Were you sort of reluctant when you went to meet them and go, oh, are they going to match my expectations of who they are?
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with like the members, but it's like they have a black backup singer, Rowetta.
Okay.
And Rowetta, I kind of befriended her first, I think, on Twitter. I just hit her up because I think I was in Las Vegas years ago, and one of the Monday song came on over the PA or the hotel sound system or whatever, and I tweeted, blah, 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 and then it kind of built from there. And I will say, though, out of all the famous people I've met in my life, and because my dad was a famous football player. Like that stuff doesn't really faze me. And, you know, I've met a lot of different people from Prince to, you know, whatever. And I've never really been as excited as I was when I got to meet the Mondays. And that was probably when I was a bit like, but they turned out to be far better than I had thought.
Oh, that's what you want. I mean, that's so cool, because you always worry. You go, oh, please don't break my heart.
Yeah, and now, you know, now we're like buddies. I talk. So Gary Whelan is the drummer, and he and I are probably the closest now. We talk on a regular basis. You know, he's based in Toronto, so he's become a big Toronto Raptors fan.
Cool.
And you know, he's a big Manchester United fan, obviously, because they're out of the Manchester scene. And they're all kind of this week in memoriam over, I guess this week marks the anniversary of Tony Wilson's death. Obviously many years ago. So, yeah, it's all cool, man. Yeah. I really, I really like, getting to meet like people that you've looked up to, but I'll expound on that Prince story. I was in Miami, man, I can't remember how many years ago this was. A long time ago, man. And it was during the time when Prince was, he was entangled in that battle with maybe Sony. Yeah.
Okay. This sounds familiar.
And remember, he had written "Slave" on his face.
Yes, that's right.
And Jay-Z even references it in 444 album. He talks about that moment. But I love Prince, and I just idolized Prince, and I grew up with Prince and Michael Jackson and all that stuff. And these guys are just legends to me. And I finally was in a club with Prince, and he walked right by me, and I was just like, and I just said, "Hey, what's up?" And then his mind was like, "Oh no, you can't look at it, blah blah blah," and all this stuff. And I was like, "Okay, well, that's a bit, whatever." But then I saw him, like, he was sitting in his booth, and like when he went to have a drink, one of his minders would pick up his drink and like put it up to his mouth for him.
I love that.
Yeah. And I was just kind of like, oh man, wow, this is heavy. But, like music is music is liberating for me.
Oh man, it's all storytelling, isn't it? Because in music, Prince, there's so many different storylines through all of his albums, and just everything that we listen to, no matter what the genre of music, it's either a story being told by the musician themselves, or you've got your own story in your own life where the music becomes a soundtrack. And that's where you become so connected with everything. And then, as you said before, it's like Happy Mondays, it's like, it saves your life. It gets you through the tough times, and you might find something that's relatable, or you can connect with it in a way and, link it to whatever's going on in your life.
And it's, I always like, it doesn't matter the genre of a track or an album or whatever, but I always seem drawn to the music that has a hint or a moderate dose of melancholy about it. That's, I don't know why that is, but I can always pick it in a song, and, that song always seems to have, you develop emotional attachments to music,
Yeah. I think it's kind of like the movies, isn't it? Like when something's playing in the background of a dramatic movie, it sort of connects you right to the scene really well, and sort of like this reflective moment in that melancholy sort of feel. It's cool.
And I guess it's really hard for me to get heavily into the sounds now. Like, look, there's some good music out there now, but I read this, going back to Prince, one of Prince's sound engineers for a long time, I believe her name was Susan Rogers. And I read this really good article, and she was saying how Prince, while he was so like OCD about certain things, he wasn't too worried about having this terribly polished sound. And I guess there have been, there's a certain type of psychologist that deals with sound and the impact it has. And apparently the more polished and overproduced a track is, the less emotional attachment that a listener is likely to form with the track.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And this lady, you should check it out. I think that's her name, Susan Rogers, and it's a really good article. And she talks about working with Prince over the years, and it was just really fascinating. And it's interesting, because like I don't know, I could be wrong, but I don't think any of One Direction's music is going to be hung up in the annals of all-time music with, say, Imagine.
No, I don't. Well, look, I mean, I might be biased with my opinion because I'm not a One Direction fan, but I tend to agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what I'm looking and it's like when is the watershed? What point in time was the watershed when, like, where are the classic songs being created now? Like, where are we going with this music? I mean, I don't know. I mean, is there a song in the past 5 or 6 years where you're going to say, man, that's something else? I remember when the Billie Jean video played and I was like, oh my God, this song. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I know I'm getting older, but still I try and listen with an open mind. And I'm just wondering, like, where are the classics coming from now?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think it's different these days because I think the way that we digest music is really different. Like, even just using that example of Billie Jean, like, it's, what were your options at the time? You'd have the radio, and then you'd have, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have any connectivity, you didn't have a lot of TV stations to sort of flick through, and this was sort of,
because that was a moment. I still remember the day. Sorry to cut you off. I still remember the night it debuted in America.
Wow.
And that's what everyone did. They waited for that video debut to come on.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. I mean, you've got the attention of the nation straight away with that. I mean, you don't have that these days because everybody's got so many different things that you can tap into with your phone or a laptop or whatever it might be, and you can create your own little niche interest on your own without anybody telling you. It's not like a mass sort of, hey, there's only like 3 or 4 different options to look at, as it was in the 90s or the 80s and going back. So these days it's almost an abundance. You've got too much stuff to choose from. I know. Which is exciting. I don't like it. Yeah,
I don't like it because I don't have it's too hard and everything's right there. Like, I would love to be able to sit down and go through an album track by track like I used to. Yeah. But, our brains aren't conditioned like that anymore. And, with all of a sudden guys just releasing two tracks.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Here's 2 tracks and you don't get that story. Like, I missed the story of an album.
We were always the same because you'd only have so much. I've said this heaps of times on the podcast that people would be sick of me, but I love saying it because we tend to forget it. When we're all growing up and, you get some pocket money or you start, earning some money at a part-time job or something like that, you would only have so much money and, a record or a CD or whatever would be so expensive. And so you'd put the majority of your money on that one album. Yep. And you would sit down and you'd be flicking through the pages in the booklet or looking at the vinyl jacket with the artwork and the liner notes.
Dude, you're scrutinizing that thing trying to see if it's worth it.
Yeah. And if it doesn't click straight away, you're disappointed because you spent like whatever $30 or whatever.
$25 for a CD, yeah.
Yep. And you're like, oh, damn it. But you've invested in this. You can't just put it to the side. You've got to spend time. So you listen and you listen and you listen, and eventually it clicks, and you go, "Oh my God, like this is amazing!" And then that's when you have those moments where you connect with these amazing albums and these amazing bands and artists over the years. But yeah, you're right. I mean, these days, I've always seen it sort of in the more. It started with a lot of rap artists and hip hop artists where they were really sort of pushing the singles and getting single songs out there. But now I'm noticing that in a lot of rock music as well, where singles are becoming the thing to do. The albums are not high priority anymore, which I understand why they're doing it, but it does take away that whole experience.
It detracts from the art and it takes away from the craft, I believe. I think Kanye, for everything that Kanye is crazy about, I think Kanye still does a good job. I think he understands the importance of telling that story. in an album, you know, track after track. And I think he tries to keep it old school. Now, whether his material is still as good as it once was, well, you know, that's debatable and up to each person. But no, I hear you totally. I just, you know, and even in rap, I just don't know where the classics are coming from in hip hop. You know, like Drake, I can really love some of his stuff, but I'm like, it feels bubblegummy to me. Like I want to throw it out after an hour.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. I was trying to think of a really good analogy to some of the more pop stuff that's been put out in the last few years, because it's almost like eating fast food. You know, you get this initial thrill of eating all this sugar and all this, you know, all this fat, but it's not sustainable. You can't just keep eating it, otherwise you start to get sick and then you don't enjoy it anymore.
But like if you go throw on Don't Believe the Hype, Public Enemy.
Yeah.
Like that is going to, and this guy, and that is going to thump until the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
That you know what I'm saying? That is a classic. Those guys were really going through some stuff, and they were talking about exactly what the world is going through now.
Yeah.
32 years ago.
Yeah.
I think Don't Believe the Hype was 1987.
Wow. That's what makes it iconic, isn't it? Like it just gives, there's purpose behind the song. There's intention behind it, and you can listen to it and understand what they're trying to say, or what their purpose is behind the song, which makes it more relatable to more people. Yeah. I mean, I'm it's something I forget about quite a bit. I'm surrounded by music all the time, but I find myself, as you said, I don't think we're programmed like we used to be, where, you know, I carve out my day where I'm looking at everything from the moment I wake up to when I go to sleep, and I've got hour blocks to do different things, and I'm always busy, and, you know, I find myself listening to podcasts, and so that takes away.
That's what I was wondering too. Has the podcast medium replaced, you know, us going track by track?
I think so.
Through a musical compilation. Has, you know, like on the way, so I ride the train a lot because I'd rather ride the train than sit in the traffic in my car. So I have a 45-minute train ride every day. And I'm like, today I was listening to Joe Rogan and Rob Lowe, and that's a 2.5 hour podcast. But it was brilliant. Like, it's tough out there, and, you know, like, and where are we going with music? Like, where's the money now?
Well, there's a bit of controversy in the last week because Spotify's CEO put a statement out saying that bands should be releasing music more regularly just to earn more money. But Spotify pays something like, I don't even know what it is. It's 0.00014 of a cent per play on Spotify. It's something, just you have to do something like almost 300 plays of a song to be able to earn a cent or $1 or something like that. Anyway, yeah, it's something crazy. So unless you're getting millions and millions and millions of plays, you cannot earn a lot of money on streaming. So a lot of bands are still trying to, well, up until a few months ago, were touring and getting out there, and that was how they're earning their money, and selling T-shirts and CDs still here and there, depending on the audience, and just trying to find ways to make money. And now, because of, you know, all the COVID stuff, a lot of musicians are trying to find other ways to branch out and do different things. So some guys are going into the gaming world and doing a lot of Twitch stuff online and trying to win some attention that way and earn some money that way. And other guys like myself, I mean, I've been doing podcasting for, you know, about 5 years, but, you know, I've sort of lent into that a bit more over the past, you know, few months. And I think musicians are just trying to continue to be creative, but just in different ways. So it's kind of good in a way, but at the same time, it's kind of sucks because Spotify gives Joe Rogan $100 million to get onto their platform, and I think they gave $100 million to Kim Kardashian as well. Something like that. I think
Bill Simmons, I think, got a lot too.
Yeah. So they've got money, but, you know, the artists that basically are bringing the attention to the platform in the first place are just not getting anything at all. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what the future brings. But musicians have always been like anything, you know, especially anything in the entertainment world or anything that's sort of unorthodox. I think a lot of these people have always had to think outside the box and try and be creative and create their own destiny. And this will just be another chapter in in the evolution of it all, and just we'll see what happens. So it's kind of exciting because it's interesting to see where it goes. But some aspects of it, you just go, oh god, like this could be so much better, but it's just not.
So I imagine you probably want to talk some basketball, huh?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, why not? Hey, I'm all about balance. It's all good. But, a good segue. I mean, I sort of mentioned it when we first connected. Storyline's so important. It's what creates fans. Fans of music and fans of sporting teams and players and all that. And I just think one thing that I found really amazing, sort of growing up in the 90s in particular, is the storylines that were created from all the players, whether it be in the Australian League or especially in the NBA with all those larger than life characters. I guess for me, like I still follow the NBL these days, and I think the NBL is bigger than it ever has been in the past. But do you see that storylines are still a big thing like they probably were, or have I got a different perception of it all?
I would think, when you were coming up and watching in the 90s, I think all of that was a lot more organic here in Australia. And I think that's probably why so much of the public still has a longing and an affection for the guys that played in that era. There was no manipulation of the media. There was no manipulation of mindset through social media. It was primarily performance based. It was personality based, but it was authentic. Like whatever you saw from us was pretty much it. I couldn't craft up some Insta story that was, filtered up and audioed up to make to make people or spectators or fans of the game think something that I wanted them to think of me. Whatever they saw me publicly was it. They saw me in person, or they saw a real interview. A real interview. It wasn't anything that was manufactured. And not saying that everything now is manufactured, but there's certainly that. There's certainly that element to it nowadays. Like things are not as natural. They're not as organic. And I think there's a lot more fan and spectator manipulation. And once again, it's just that same old thing. Is it that real sustainable attachment?
Yeah, I always sort of take sort of my perception with a grain of salt, because in the 90s I was growing up and like anybody, when you're sort of in your sort of going into your teens and then your teenage years, they're formative times in your life. So everything that's happening around you, everything's changing just in general. And so everything becomes significant. And so, like music, whatever you're listening to at the time becomes the soundtrack of your life, which just becomes so important. And even years and years later, you still think back fondly. And so I have that bias in my head when I think about the NBL and the NBA. And so these days, as getting a little bit older and just getting sort of stuck into the everyday life and responsibilities of being an adult and having lots of different distractions, I just wonder whether it's just a case of that my attention's not as focused as what it was in the 90s with basketball. But at the same time, I try to sort of really keep an eye on all the players, and I do see the personalities, and I see some of that there, but yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's like anything, I guess, as the eras change, the vibe changes, doesn't it?
And it does. And nowadays, I mean, the players are under so much more scrutiny, and, I guess there probably may be some apprehension to actually reveal who they really are. Because, as we're seeing in the AFL, like there have been death threats this weekend over some games because I guess allegedly punchers, are not doing well, and they're starting to attack the players. And that's just craziness. But yeah, I mean, sport's different. Every game is visible live. In our day, your game may have been live in your home market, or somebody may have had access to it, but not every game was shown live. So, the scrutiny was a lot less. And, I imagine it would be tough to really be yourself. And God knows, man, if those cameras and phones were out when I was out partying in my heyday, good Lord.
Yeah.
Thank God for that. I got out just in time, man.
Yeah, I guess it's just it's a society thing. It's not even just sport. It's just everything. I mean, we're all very we've got apprehension about what our actions are and what we say. And because we've got things like, we're both on Twitter. So, Twitter sort of encourages you, if you're not thinking too quickly, that you just, whatever's in your head, you just quickly tap it out on your phone and just let it go. And then afterwards you go, oh geez, I probably shouldn't have said that. And there's a bit of regret, but it's such an instant thing and it's out there and it can travel quickly, especially if it's not good.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I've ever had that tweet regret.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I haven't quite experienced that yet. I try and think it through pretty clearly, but I'm going to speak my mind at the same time. And I've tried, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but sometimes, things are you're just trying to be professional, especially if I'm taking on the arm of a media member at that time. Cause, sometimes I might be speaking on behalf of my own podcast or something. And I just need to be open and honest and direct about something, an observation,
Mm-hmm.
And it is tough, people get hurt, but hell, I'm 53. I'm not really concerned about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
You're still young.
Oh.
You have to go, you have to develop that shell yet.
It's forming slowly. It's getting there. Oh. Did you mentioned earlier about your dad and your dad being in the NFL, and I didn't really. I sort of just did a bit of digging around the other week, and I remember it from years ago, but just completely forgot about it. But do you think that? I mean, I have no idea about what your relationship was with your dad, but did your dad sort of help you sort of form sort of that? Because I'll take another step back and go in a different direction. Just to give some context.
I think you're headed down the right direction. Yeah, without a doubt, he definitely had a major influence on my sporting.
Well, just sporting, but also I think just your personality and your ego. So even just my perception of you growing up and watching you play and the way that you interacted, and just what you said before about, sort of the different. It was just the game, and that's all it was, and you didn't have the social media sort of around you and sort of influencing everything that you did. You still had that persona of at least from my point of view, as a very easygoing person, happy person. Obviously, on the floor and playing, it's 100% serious, and there's a goal there, and you've got to go in all in or nothing. But you've always had that approachable sort of persona around you, and still having that level of professionalism. Even though you mentioned, you were, there's plenty of partying over the years.
Yeah.
But do you think your dad had any sort of influence in sort of that balance that you had of just being sort of that, having that persona and being sort of likable and approachable and adaptable?
I think probably more my mother. My mother's very, my mother's very personable, and she's a little bit left of center, but she's just, she can be wacky at times. She's got a great sense of humor. She loves to laugh, and I was very close with both of my parents. I mean, my parents wound up getting divorced, but no, and I'm still cool with them. Everything is fine. It's just, I was just fortunate enough to have both influences, and that's not common, especially with a lot of African American athletes.
Was it? I mean, obviously, it would be normal for you growing up in that environment, but I guess looking back, did you have a little bit of an unusual upbringing given your dad's profession?
Yeah, well, my parents came from, not a great part of, especially my dad. My dad's side of the family was really poor, out of the ghettos of Washington, D.C. My mother would have been like maybe just slightly out of poverty. But my dad's family was for sure entrenched deep in the poverty. And it was and my parents had me when they were 18. So it was only, the first 3 or 4 years of my life, my dad was at university and I was living with my grandparents. So, and my mother would go and visit my dad sometimes up in Boston. And I was kind of shown between my grandparents and so forth, and my aunt and my uncles and everybody kind of looked after me. And it was only when my dad made the NFL, I was probably about 4 years of age, that we got out of there. And then at that point, he was making a good income, and I was, all of a sudden we were living in the suburbs and I was going to good schools, and all that changes, and that's just how quickly your fortune can change. And I had nothing to do with that.
Did you notice that? Like, was that dramatic for you at the time, or was it sort of just this? I mean, it's not the right word, but it's not a natural sort of progression, of course. But was it dramatic?
Oh, it's totally against the odds. And I mean, this is crazy that we're even talking about it, because I addressed this with my mother, and I was like, what if my dad hadn't have made the NFL? What did my, all of a sudden my last name wouldn't have meant Jack.
Mm.
And, certainly my road becomes a lot tougher. Not that it was easy, but, all of a sudden I'm able to go to better schools, and I'm able to, and this is part of the problem in the African-American plight, is you don't get to see how the majority, the whites, succeed, how they handle things, how they interact. And that's part of, whether you want to call it overt racism or whatever it is, or lack of opportunity, when you're able to see what, the more affluent class, how they handle things, there's learning in there.
Mm.
And I think that definitely helped me. And, it opens up opportunities for you. And yeah, I had some talent basketball wise, but realistically it was the fact that I was a good student and my parents pushed me to be a good student. That ultimately got me into a really good private school. And then my body started to grow and I started to develop as a basketball player, and everything kind of came together, but it came together late for me. I wasn't any type of prospect in high school.
Well, so when you say late, like in comparison, so what would be the normal age versus sort of when the time was sort of
halfway through my senior year, I didn't have one college offer.
Yeah, right. Okay.
In high school. So, yeah, I think I got my first little look maybe in January of my final season. That's really, really, really late.
And by that stage, were you sort of thinking this is just not going to happen?
No, I thought I was good. I just kept playing and tried to remain optimistic. I knew I was good enough. I just knew that I was small and I was thin, and I was still a year young for my grade.
Hmm.
So I just had to maintain hope, and one school took a chance on me.
And how does it work in the US when it comes to that stuff? Is it a case that you guys are playing and you have scouts come out that will just sort of keep an eye on what's going on, or do you have to proactively do things yourself to put I don't know, like applications out to different schools? How's it work?
Well, back then it was a lot tougher, right? Because, just the methods of communication were much slower, and it was expensive to call people, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it was really, really rough. And I think it was really word of mouth. A friend of a friend called this coach at Iowa, and then they flew down and had a look at me, and they're like, oh, okay, we like him. But then that didn't work out, so they referred me to Davidson, and then that worked out. And but realistically, it was, I wouldn't say the chances of me playing pro, I wouldn't say the odds were good at that point.
Mm-hmm. Was it a big sort of spark for yourself when Davidson came along?
Yeah, well, because like I said, I was a good student, so I had 2 visits lined up. One was to Davidson, one was to Columbia University in Manhattan, an Ivy League school, but they didn't give scholarships, and I felt that I wanted a scholarship, and I felt that standard of basketball, I was better than that. And so I went to Columbia like on the Friday night for a visit, and I left out of there Sunday evening. And I think I went to Davidson the following Wednesday. When I got to Davidson, I was like, yep, this is where I need to be. And they were able to supply me with a scholarship, and there was the potential for me to start right away to play as a freshman. And I just thought, that's where I wanted to be. And I signed, and it was, like you look back on decisions and you're like, damn, I got that one right. And you look back on others, you're like, whoa. We'll chalk that one up to a learning experience. But Davidson was that was just man, I just, I worked hard and I got lucky at the same time. So
had you already, at that stage already sort of in the back of your mind thought that the destiny for you or the path that you were going to go along when it came to basketball was going to be the NBA, or had you seen other people sort of looking into sort of other leagues or even, like a lot of players end up doing like yourself, end up going abroad?
I went to Davidson. I wanted to be a lawyer. So I started studying economics and my goal was to go to law school after I graduated from Davidson. And I didn't have any intention in my first couple of years of trying to play pro basketball. It was probably after my third year where I started to go off, where I was like, okay, I might be able to do something. And then, a couple of pro scouts came and watched me play. And I took confidence from that. And I thought, look, if they're coming to see me play, I must have something. Yeah. So then I started really aiming high and thinking, I think I could play in the NBA. By the time I finished at Davidson after my fourth year, I was thinking I can play in the NBA in the right situation. And I had some tryouts and I did well at the tryouts, but sometimes it's a numbers game and the numbers didn't go my way and I got the opportunity. Brian Curl got in touch with me and I had the opportunity to trial and play and try and make the Bullets roster. Back in 1989. Jesus. Were you born?
Yeah, I was.
Oh, okay, my fault.
I won't tell you how old I was, though. Barely born. Was that pretty wild for you? I mean, had you seen other players, from the US go to Australia? Was Australia sort of something that you were aware of, or was this sort of just this thing that came out of nowhere and you thought, oh, I never even thought that this would be an option?
I never thought it would be an option. I was calling like England, all these crusty teams in England, and I was, and I knew I was better. Like I knew that, and this unfortunately, is the attitude that you have to have. I just knew I was too good for England, but I just had to get somewhere. I mean, my first job I took in El Salvador. That's where I started my career. Wow. Before Brian Curl called me, and I made $1,500 a month. I was there for 4 months and it was in the middle of a civil war. And sometimes we just couldn't leave the house for 4 or 5 days because the guerrillas were causing problems and it wasn't safe.
Wow.
So that was my first job, but I got through it and I learned to become a pro and how to focus real quick.
Oh man, that's incredible. I mean, would that have been a culture shock for you to go to El Salvador?
Dude, you hear bombs going off and machine gun fire. Damn straight it was a culture shock. Yeah.
Oh man, that's wild. That is just
So this is I remember the first day I got there, I knew some Salvadorans, right? I went to college at Davidson and that's how I got the hookup. And one of my teammates at Davidson, who was a bit older than me, he had already played a season down and he's like, come down here, it's fine. And so the first night I got there, we drove from San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador. We drove through guerrilla occupied territory up into Guatemala because they wanted to party at Guatemala City. Dude, it was the scariest drive I've ever gone on in my life. We're at the border for 3 hours. There's a civil war going on, People are getting kidnapped, all types of stuff. It's madness.
And here you are coming to play basketball.
I'm 22.
Wow. Oh, you haven't experienced anything yet, really. I mean, this is probably your.
We'd be sleeping in our bed now. The place we lived on was nice. It was a mango plantation. We had maids, everything. They looked after us like that. But several nights we'd be sleeping. It's the middle of the summer. It's hot as hell down in El Salvador, and you just don't have any human rights. So even though you're on your own property, we had this big mansion, but my college teammate and I, Jerry and I would sleep in the same room. Because we were scared at night. Like, I don't think I maybe slept 2 hours every night, probably for the first 2 months. Like, we would wake up in the middle of the night and there would just be like soldiers outside in the yard, like just hanging out.
Oh, jeez. I can't begin to imagine.
Man, yeah. It's a tough way to start your career.
Oh, man. So Australia looked like a slightly better option than
El
Salvador.
When I got to Brisbane, I was like, yes, I am good. I am good. But then I had the first 2 seasons, 90 and 91 in Brisbane. Yeah. And, there's a lot of stories about what went down in my second season, whatever. It didn't work out, and the Bullets released me. And then, dude, I had to go play in England for a year. And, talk about a miserable place. I went to England, Birmingham, England.
Another Bullets team.
Yes. Oh, you did your research. Oh, very nice.
I remember the Rucker years.
Birmingham is back then, 1992. Yeah. Had to have been one of the 5 worst cities in the Western world.
Wow.
And miserable. Oh man, it was bleak. That sun in England, dude, in the winter, that sun goes down at about 3:30. And it is like, oh my God. And not to mention, I mean, no offense to the English listeners or anything, but let me tell you, the English ain't the most welcoming people I've ever met in my life.
Oh, well, I mean, I've never been to Birmingham before, but from what I can recall, it's fairly industrial.
It's the home of the Industrial Revolution. If I had to hear that one more time when I was there, and apparently it's not even true anyway.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, that claim has been definitely questioned. Yeah, but that's what I lived I lived right off of the, I don't know if you know this place. It's famous in England. It's called the Spaghetti Junction.
I've heard of.
Yeah. It's carcinogen heaven.
Oh, great for the lungs.
Yeah. It's like, if you're going north to south, you've got to pass through Spaghetti Junction. And it's like, man, it was rough. And, back then was probably, I used to dabble in a bit of, recreational stuff. And I remember my little fish and chips guys, they were great. They were Pakistanis.
Yep.
And they would give me like this secret code where I could call back to America. And then they'd always leave me with a little something underneath my fish and chips underneath the tin foil. So that got me through those winters.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah, a little muscle relaxant, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so England was, but England, they were really good athletes, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good athletes, and the team I played on was all black. So I really got pushed from an athletic point of view. The basketball wasn't great, but and once again, I guess when you go through, it's called contrast, right? When you living something and it's not what you want, you figure out very quickly through contrast what you do want.
Yes.
And that when I got back to Australia, I was ready.
Yeah, I think leaving Brisbane, and from what I can recall, I mean, Brisbane's very different these days, as you're well aware, to what it was when you first arrived. But Brisbane's always had the reputation of a very sleepy, quiet, big town. It's never, people still refuse to call it a city, although I can definitely call it a city these days. But
yeah,
to leave that and then to go to Birmingham and experience that, I think at the very least you go, oh geez, like I think I've definitely picked a worse option here.
Yeah. What day did
sunshine.
all go wrong? I'll go back and fix that. But you know what, Andy? Check it. I loved Brisbane in the early 90s. I loved it. Man, it was so much fun. And like, there was a freedom and a liberty that, that's yeah, it's to be cherished, and it's, that is gone. Like, roaming the streets at 5 or 6, walking out of clubs at 7 in the morning.
Yeah. 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 That's
You
long
know,
gone.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
like,
very different. Very different.
yeah, and it was, just the rawness of it all.
I think because it was always seen as a big country town, it had that country vibe, where it was a little bit sort of like the Wild West, in a little bit more of a kind of a bit of a city vibe, because there was more people, but it still had that very loose, anything can go sort of atmosphere around the place, where really it's always entertaining. Something's going to happen, and you didn't feel restricted or confined by all the, I don't know, whatever we've got now, all the regulations and rules and things like that. Because I mean, even I moved away from Brisbane about 15 years ago, and I've been in Sydney ever since. And just in those 15 years, seeing Brisbane and how much it's changed in those few years, it's chalk and cheese. It's so different. And every time I come back and I'm there for a few days, I've still got family up there, and I'm going through the city and just looking around. And I love Brisbane. I really miss Brisbane, but every time I go back, I go, it's so different again. It's growing. It's becoming a city.
I mean, I really like it now. They've done whoever the city planners are and stuff, they've done a really good job, and they're doing some major things now. I think they're trying to get this 2032 bid going for the games, and I think they've done a good job. But a similar thing happened in Sydney, because when did I leave Sydney? I moved out of Sydney in 2008, and by the end of my run there in 2008, Sydney wasn't really the same. Like, the nightlife started to suck. Like, as soon as Oxford Street went dead, like, that hurt. And then they shut down the Cross. Like, what's the nightlife? I haven't lived in Sydney for 5 years, but
it started to pick back up a little bit. So some of the regulations started to ease, and I think some changes of government certainly helped. But obviously,
what's the Cross like nowadays?
They've still got a lot of the restrictions in place. It's nothing like it was. It's still a shadow of what it was 10 odd years ago. And I think a lot of the activities moved sort of into other pockets now, away from that area, which is a shame.
I just thought, man, I remember, in the early 90s, just being able to go up and down Oxford Street, and just all types of people, straight, gay, all types of colors. And it was so vibrant, and, everyone mixed with everyone quite easily, and it was no problems. And the Cross started to pick up sort of pre-Olympic Games, pre-Sydney 2000. The Cross really picked up and got a bit of status. It wasn't just like an outlaws haven. It was, Hugo's moved in there, and there were some other places in there that were really good. And it was just really rolling in the lead up to the Olympic Games. And then I would say by about 2005, 2006, you could see the squeeze was coming.
Yeah. Oh, you felt it everywhere. I mean, even when I first came down here and started playing, we still had a number of music venues in the middle of the city. Sort of Surrey Hills and near Central train station, and sort of going up George Street. And then once a lot of the laws started to change with additional regulations and licenses and things like that, then a lot of these venues just couldn't afford to keep these places open, so they just started to shut down. And so for a lot of live music, it got moved into the suburbs, which is fine in some ways, but it's no longer central where everybody across the city can all migrate into the one central spot. It just makes it harder. And as soon as it becomes an extra step in the commute, then people start to not be as motivated to go and attend things anymore. So over the past about to be 10 years, that it's just 10 plus years, it's really sort of died a miserable death, and we started to get sort of signs of it coming back to life and this sort of new chapter, and it looked really exciting. And then coronavirus hit, and so now we're all sort of going, oh well, we'll just have to wait and see.
So are pubs are operating down there now?
They are. They've got the restrictions on how many people are within the establishment, depending on how big the place is. And you've got to do your sign in, your check in, your QR code stuff. And it's not too bad, but there's no live music. There is some live music, but you have to be sitting down at a table, which sort of defeats the purpose of going to a live show. So there's still some live music happening, but it's not to the extent of what it was, obviously. But I think just what's been happening in Melbourne over the past few weeks, and I don't think Sydney's going to get as bad as Melbourne, but we're just seeing this slight increase in more cases, and I feel it's inevitable that we'll end up taking a few steps back and having to lock things up a little bit, and everyone will have to stay at home a bit longer, which is a shame, but you do what you need to do. So we'll just see what happens.
You saw that New Zealand has new cases now.
Yeah. So
it's just bizarre.
It's bizarre in every direction you look, no matter what side of the fence you sit on and which part of the world you're in. There's just different levels of bizarre, and every day, and that's going back to this whole social media world we live in. It's this instantaneous, like just immediate feed of information coming through, and a lot of it is just garbage, and you're just trying to wade through it to go, what's real, what's not, what should I pay attention to, what should I disregard. And it's just it's really overwhelming. So you have to try and keep things simple and just go, all right, what have I got to do today? and just stick to the plan, and that's all you can do.
So are you masking up when you go out down there?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. And I think it's not New South Wales government gave a recommendation. They didn't want to mandate it, like Victoria. So I've noticed that there's more people out and about wearing a mask, but there's a lot of people that just aren't. And I think it's just mixed feelings, and people, I think here still, because they're not in Melbourne, not in Victoria, that they still don't think it's probably as bad as, even though what they're seeing everywhere on the news. So I think people are sort of in a sense of denial still about, even just taking some minor precautions. So, so I've got the mask, and, it is what it is, but, and how effective and to what benefit, who knows, but I'd rather be on the safe side and at least demonstrate that, I'm trying to do the right thing by other people around me as well. So,
I ordered some. I think they're due in tomorrow.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to wear a face covering as if I take the train. Yeah, but the trains are empty up here.
Yeah, I was going to say, public transport, I think just as, I don't think there's many people using it at all. I think people are just really paranoid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they really haven't returned. They haven't really returned to work. I mean, Brisbane it's fine, but it's not really. You just feel it in the air. Like, I don't know what it is. It's like some type of 10% fear, 40% caution. It's just a weird mix, it's just hard to describe.
And I think a lot of people are frustrated as well, because people's livelihoods are being taken away from them. They can't do what they want to do anymore, and I think we've just been so lucky, just like even what we were saying before about, what Brisbane was like in the early 90s, this sort of carefree vibe about the place, and just this era that's not really around anymore. But I think in Australia, we've just been so lucky. We've just had everything at our fingertips. Life has been good. We've had our fair share of adversity through different things, natural disasters and stuff like that.
Natural disasters,
But we've built this resilience, and I think we've got this laid back culture that we've always embraced. And I think this has probably been the first time ever, or at least in a couple of generations, where we've really sort of we've been forced to have to sort of really work together and try to do the right thing. And I think people aren't used to that. I think people are just used to living their life and doing what they want to do when they feel like it. And now not a lot of people can do that. So I think some people are going through those motions. It's almost like a child being told what to do, and they don't want to do it. So they're digging their heels in, and you're watching people go through these stages as they're trying to come to terms with what life is like at the moment. And it's very interesting to watch. But as I said before, I just try to think about what I'm doing, what's going on in my world, what's going on today, and just try to just do my thing.
Keep it
and
moving.
Yeah, and try not to stress about everything else, because there's only so much you can control. Control your own world, and then hopefully other people will follow suit.
Wow.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. So yeah. Did you get a similar vibe when you came back to Australia after the UK? When because I think you went to
Newcastle.
Newcastle, and then you went up far north as well.
Townsville.
A few years later as well. Were they different changes again, or was it sort of a similar sort of East Coast Australian vibe that you got?
I didn't really love the smaller places. Like Newcastle was okay. Townsville was okay. Townsville, I thought I played really good basketball, but the living side of it was difficult. I like a bit more pop. Yep. Well, especially at that time when I was much younger.
Yeah.
Now it's a bit different. I'm more of a loner now.
Yeah.
But back then, I needed a bit more. So, but once again, pleasant places. But I like a bit of progressive thought. Some stimulation, that type of stuff. A bit of edginess in a place. And those places were probably, while nice, they're probably a bit singular in dimension for my long-term availability.
Yeah. And I hear you. I grew up in Queensland all my life. Like lived in Rockhampton, and lived way out west as well as a kid, and I mean, obviously a different perspective again, just given sort of my background and upbringing, but it wasn't really until not long before I left Brisbane, but really when I moved to Sydney, that suddenly I was just exposed to lots of different people, lots of different backgrounds, lots of different levels of education, different thoughts and perspectives. And suddenly I'm like, oh, this is what life is. This is what it's meant to be like. It's not meant to be just the same person, carbon copied in the same town. It's not just the one way of thinking. There's lots of different ideas here. That's exciting.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. And that's what, I like that. I like to hear different perspectives, even if I don't, I find, like right now I've got the frozen image of Donald Trump on my TV, and I think he is just a full-blown disaster as president. Yeah. But I think there's a lot to be learned. Again, like you sit and I find him fascinating because of how, how different his values are from mine. It's and seemingly from common decency. It's really a trip to watch the leader of America, just be so irresponsible and not be willing to step forth and do just what's right for the country and like for the world. Everyone's suffering because the United States is suffering.
It would almost be, sometimes I look at, even today, I think there was a video going around where he was saying, he was talking about what was it, the Spanish
World War II.
Yeah, and then he got the dates completely mixed up and basically said, the plague or whatever it was basically ended World War II, and we're like, oh my god, like, have you had a history lesson? Like, this is insane.
Dude, he would have no idea. He would have no idea about the issues of World War I or World War II. He'd have no idea. Yeah, I guarantee you that. No. He'd have no clue.
No, and it's just I look at him and I just look at the way that he acts and what he says, and similar to you, I sort of look with fascination because it's just it's a human ticking in a very different way, calibrated in a completely different way to us, and we're like, oh, this is fascinating. Yeah. And then at the same time, sort of looking at people around him that are following him, and people that are in a sense of denial because it's almost like the lesser of two evils. I'd rather him than whatever the other side is suggesting, no matter what it is. And it's this stubbornness and this tribalistic sort of mentality that comes from blind loyalty to something without sort of just completely disregarding the reality of, you know, how damaging and how dangerous it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Let me ask you this question, Andy.
Yeah.
When you watch the American presidents, and even Trump, someone who I loathe, but he does seem to carry himself, say, differently than, say, Scott Morrison.
Mm.
Now, do you think that is a function of the individual himself, or does that become a part of the individual because of the position he's now in? Why does it always look like the American leaders carry themselves with so much more austerity?
Well, I've asked this to a lot of American friends of mine because, you know, I always look at cultural comparisons, and I mean, you would have seen this over the years with Australians, and I don't think it's as bad as what it used to be, but we had this level of modesty in our culture, which was great, and was a sort of romantic sort of vibe around being modest and humble, but it was also this tall poppy syndrome where that if you talked yourself up too much, then they would cut you down the size. Like, hey, don't get too big of yourself. Don't get too cocky because, you know, nobody likes a big ego. And so we culturally were sort of taught to just always stay humble. But sometimes that was really damaging. And I always looked at the US as the complete opposite, where, you know, from the perception just through movies and pop culture that people were encouraged to talk themselves up and to strive for things and talk about what they achieved and what they're good at and be really confident about that and that outward sort of personality that's projected. And I think a lot of that's amplified through movies and you know, pop culture, as I said before, and that's probably not the reality everywhere in the United States. But I sort of see that when it comes to, even politicians, I think there's a level of the way that they hold themselves and project themselves, which I guess what they're trying to do is communicate with their population and their own culture in a way that has to be convincing and win people over. And I guess when you've also got a population of, what is it now, 350 million or something? Yeah. It's a lot of people. There. That's crazy. So, you know, there's almost this additional level of pressure that's put onto the personality to project yourself in a way that commands. And the US has always been held up as the global leaders, which, you know, probably in more recent times is getting questionable now, just given what's been going on. But I think that's probably part of it. And when I look at someone like Scott Morrison, putting my look, I don't have a lot of favorable things to say about him, but I think a lot of it is probably more so around, I think, the way that he holds himself in comparison to probably other leaders that we've had in the past. And I think there's an element of, and maybe it's not always truth behind it, but I think the perception that he puts out sometimes is that there is still a lack of care or a lack of compassion to people, and he has a level of smugness where it seems that he's more self-indulgent to his own values, his own things that are important to him, rather than he's putting himself first before the community. And I think that sort of shows in his portrayal to the general public at times, and I think that hurts him probably more so than his decisions. I thought he had I thought when COVID hit, I thought he started off the game. He was like, 1 for his first 6 shots. He started off rough. Then he had a little hot streak where I thought he kind of got full of himself. He knocked down a couple threes, He got a steal and a nice assist on the break. Yeah. But that only lasted for about 4 minutes. It was a quick patch. And then he kind of he regressed back to what he is. And it's kind of a bit of just shooting bricks.
Yeah, he got hot, and I was like, okay, maybe this is where he stands up.
Yeah.
And he springs, and this is the catalyst for him becoming a real leader. And I just don't think he's done much in the past 2.5 months or so. Or am I wrong? Maybe I've just stopped paying attention.
Yeah, I think at least the perception I have of it is that he's put the responsibility on the states. And he's taken Trump. A step back, and he said, you guys sort it out yourselves, and we're not going to get involved. And I think that alone probably sends a really bad message to your average person in the country, just thinking, are we being looked after? and every
Okay,
state's going
I
to
got you.
have a different agenda, a different purpose, and there's no continuity between the states and what they want to do. So you don't have that overarching leader saying, "Hey, this is the way we're going to go. Get behind us, and we're going to get through this together." And there's none of that at the moment, and I think that's probably what's hurting us. I mean, if you look at what's been happening, I mean, this has always been sort of hot in the news over the past several months, but New Zealand's Prime Minister, I mean, she's just been knocking it out of the park with the way that she's handled it. And she probably, if you look at the mechanics behind the scenes, she probably hasn't really done anything absolutely groundbreaking, but the compassion and the projection that she's put out to her country has basically won everybody over and got everyone behind her to do the right thing. And that's probably why she's been able to be as successful as she has so far. So it's interesting.
It's like a good coach. Sometimes it's not about the X's and O's, but how you manage the people.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It's all those different personalities. You got you got a melting pot of so many different people, so many different backgrounds, different opinions, different personalities, and you've got to find a way to try and achieve some common ground to get them all on the same page and say, hey, we've got a common goal here and this is going to benefit all of us. So let's move in this direction. And I've got your back, but I need you to have my back as well. And that's what a leader should be. And I look at these disasters that have been happening over the past, 12 months or so, especially in Australia with all the natural stuff that's been happening and obviously COVID. And I think, from a politician point of view, I mean, this is, as you just said before, this is prime time to just win people over. This is where leaders shine. This is where you stand up and say, I'm gonna save the day here. I'm gonna lead the charge, and nobody's
You can make a mark, your legacy.
Yeah, and it's just like this is, you don't hope for bad things to happen, but if you're in that sort of position of power, I mean, these situations are sometimes welcome because it is an opportunity to really show what you're made of. And
but sometimes people. They, and I, in my business with what I do, I train players and I help develop their skills and performance coach and all that type of stuff. And one of the main things I always tell them is, don't operate out of fear. Operate from a position of belief and confidence and knowing that you've done the work, and don't worry about fear. And I think, I think a lot of people right now are grounded in fear. Like, what if I get this wrong?
Yeah, that's right. Sort of this, and naturally so. I mean, people want to be cautious, and they don't want to be the one that makes the decision that ends up impacting lives and people's livelihoods. But that's why people get into those positions as well, is that you have to make really tough decisions. That's you can't just put anybody. I mean, that's why it's hard to become a prime minister or a president. It's not for everybody. That's why it's a certain type of person. But I don't know if the people that we have at the moment are the right people. So
how much NBA do you watch?
Well, look, I was watching a lot. Then obviously COVID hit, and then I watched the NBA transition and try and work out what they're going to do. And I have not watched a full game. I have watched highlights, and I've been trying to wrap my head around.
But you're familiar with James Harden, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got mad respect. He's an amazing talent. Not sure if I've ever seen. I've been watching the NBA since 1973.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I've ever seen a greater scorer than James Harden. Amazing talent, great passer. But I don't love watching him play. But I'm also going to defend him when people are like, "Oh, all he does is shoot." I'm like, "Yo, my man, he's dropping 35 points a game in the best league in the world against the best defenders, and he's doing this every single night."
That's it. That's his role.
Yeah. So not everybody talks about wanting that position. Yeah, I want to be the scorer, but do you really want it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to be prime minister. Do you really want it? Are you gonna stand up and take that shot and miss that shot and deal with all that scrutiny? That's not for, like you just said, that ain't for everybody.
It's not. And it's so easy for all of us to sit back and and be the commentator, be the couch commentator, spectator, and yell at the TV or our phones and give our opinion and get on Twitter or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And it's easy. It's just it's an impulsive reaction that we have. But yeah, the reality of it is that a lot of us couldn't do it. And
well, I mean, like in music, you know, you want to be U2, you want to go tour for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Around the world. Like, it sounds cool until, you know, you're playing Copenhagen and you're a month and a half into it and you're not feeling well.
Yeah, that's right. Playing the same songs over and over and over again.
Yeah. And you know, you're the Edge, you're 55.
Yeah. But then you play the next show and you're just a little bit off. You're not feeling, and then someone in the crowd's going, "You're shit. I can't believe you." Yeah, it's like, come on, man. On the Edge.
It's great. It's great though. I mean, that's why it's such a rare thing to be, you know, and to be able to do, you know, to be fully involved in your passion is such a fortune. And I'm just grateful every day that I get to, you know, I get to coach what I know best. I get to do what I know best every day.
Yeah, well, that's probably a good place to begin to wrap it up, because I wanted to talk to you about, well, I guess it's your school, isn't it? It's like a coaching school that you've got.
Rucker basketball.
Yeah,
DRB. Yeah, so I work out of a couple of different locations, and basically it's not necessarily an academy, but I work off like the American trainer style. So every session is basically customized. I decide which players are in the session, and look, once you're in the system for a long time, you kind of have your set times, but it's, you know, it's basically small group, 2 to 6 players. The average group size is probably 3 to 4 players. So and it goes for an hour. So it's really personalized, and you get a lot of reps and you get a lot of supervised reps, and it's me every session.
Cool. I love it.
So I'm right there, hands on, and I love it, you know, like, you know, my natural personality can take me through lows, but then there's the manic side, and that's where, you know, I've learned to use that in the coaching to my benefit. And, you know, I love it, man. I'm on the court every weekday morning at 6 a.m.
Has that been, I mean, obviously you would have been impacted a couple of months ago with what was going on with the COVID stuff, but how's it look
tough.
now?
Oh, now I'm busier than ever, because I think there's been on the behalf of parents and players, I think there is a new appreciation for, like, you know what, man, like, we got to get out on this court. Yeah. Like, that thing was taken away from us, and now we realize how much we love the game. And I think, you know, parents know now that I think the parents saw the emotional and psychological change in their children. Without sport, and, you know, without, you know, with part of their sport is my sessions. And, yeah, it's good now. And the kids have been really keen. And fortunately, I've got some really, really good prospects, man.
Do you find that, I mean, as you said, it's quite tailored to the person themselves. Yep. So it's going to change with every single person that you coach. But do you find that there's common things that people need to always neglect from a skill set point of view when it comes to developing, I guess, their skill set when it comes to basketball?
Just basic little bad habits, lack of ball security. Lack of ball security is like one of my pet peeves. Inefficient body movements. I hate that. That's just all, you know, that's waste. Yep. We don't need waste. And especially if you're not going to be elite athletically, if you're not genetically a lottery winner, then your body movement has to be so spot on. Your footwork has to be so mastered. And when you talk about a skill that you must have nowadays, if you can't shoot the ball, get off the court. You've got to be able to shoot the basketball. Yeah. I mean, they can tell you all this stuff. Oh, yeah, we need somebody to do the, you know, get the 50-50 ball and do all the little. Yeah, that's all great. But you know what wins games? Put the ball in the basket. Man, that's the way the game's played.
I'm seeing seven footers knocking down threes these days as a norm. You know, it's just
Porzingis.
Yeah. I was
the unicorn. He's 7'3", man.
It's crazy. It's just I can't wrap my head around it. So I mean, the game, obviously, as you know, like, you know, the game's evolved and changed over the years so much. So there you go. I always had these flashbacks of me, you know, playing club basketball as a kid and just being absolutely atrocious, just horrible. So actually, I'll put you on the spot. When you guys let us back into Queensland again, when you open up those borders, I might twist your arm and see if you can give me a couple of pointers.
Not a problem. We can video it and everything. We can put it out on social media.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
You once you sign that waiver, my man. Anything that happens in my session is my property. So we're good. We can do that definitely.
All right. I'll my people will talk to your people.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Go and say hi to Derek by following him on the socials, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can search for Derek Rucker and also Derek Rucker Basketball for his coaching program. If you're in Brisbane and you want to get some skills, definitely hit him up. I'm sure he'd be willing to show you some tricks and tips when it comes to all things basketball. But an amazing guy, an amazing career, and a pretty surreal moment for me to be talking to somebody that I really looked up to as a kid. Short little fat kid trying to play basketball, and Derek Rucker was this larger than life character, an amazing basketball player, and another NBL legend to add to the list of amazing people that have been on the podcast so far. So make sure, if you haven't heard the other chats that I've had with people such as Mark Davis, Adam Ballinger, Leroy Loggins, of course, then go back and listen to those previous episodes, and I certainly will be getting more of the NBL giants on this podcast over the coming weeks and months and years. So I will not stop. So make sure you go and check all that out. But go and say hi to Derek, as well as all the guests that have been on the Andy Social podcast over the past 5 or so years. It's now been 5 years since Andy Social has been up and running, and we're still chugging along here and doing great things. So thanks for being a part of the journey. Now, before we wrap it up, patreon.com/Andy Dowling is a place to go to support this podcast if you're that way inclined. And support starts from only $1 a month. Dirt cheap, nice and easy, a little feel-good payment that you can just forget about and not have to worry about. But if you want to support with a little bit more, there is a weekly exclusive Patreon podcast episode that comes out. And there's also a newsletter that gets posted to your letterbox. That's right, old school. That's the way I roll. So, you can jump over to patreon.com/Andy Dowling and check all that out. Now, I have no idea who's coming next week, coming on the podcast next week. I think it's another musician. I've got quite a few people that have been recorded. I've got another big bank of great people, some really exciting people, and I'm looking forward to sharing them all with you. So stay tuned for that. But until next week, folks, take care and ta-ta.